All right, everyone, welcome to the launch of Right-Sized Belonging, 6 Practices for Organizers. My name is Sammie, and I'm going to be your host today. I want to go ahead and start by acknowledging and giving respects to the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung peoples, the traditional owners and stewards of Narm, the land that I present to you from today, also known as Melbourne, Australia. I like to pay my respects to elders, past and present, of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and extend that respect to any Indigenous people present here today. Sovereignty was never ceded, and this was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also want to extend my respect and my love to Ohlone land, also known as the Bay Area, my home that has helped me through many of the lessons and the life that has taken me to this point. We really can't talk about belonging without acknowledging the colonization that strips Indigenous people from their land and cultures. And I have learned so much from Indigenous folks about what it means to belong to the earth and act in right relationship to my homes. And so I want to encourage other non-Indigenous folks to support local Indigenous projects. 2 ways to do so that I have for you today include, for folks in Australia, Pay the Rent, which supports a sovereign body of First Nations people to make decisions about their own needs. And on Ohlone land, the Shumi land tax, which supports the Sigorte land trusts and their work of rematriation and returning Indigenous land to Indigenous people. On the screen, you can scan the QR codes, or in the chat, we're going to paste some direct links to these different organizations so you can click, follow through, donate. While you're here, please let us know in the chat, who are you and where are you calling in from? We've also included a resource to native land, which helps you understand the Indigenous or First Nations name of the land that you may be on. So take a second, everyone, and let me know. Introduce yourself if you haven't already, with your name, your gender pronoun, and where are you calling in from? Let's hear it. I'll also put this slide up for a little longer so people can scan QR codes. Hi, Cynthia. Wow. Hi, Gemma and Jacinta. Thank you for coming. Everyone is so busy paying the rent that they can't type. I totally get it. I would be too. Irma, hi. Hi, everyone. Hey, KP. Wow. Hi, Ella. Hi, Eddie. Well, I'm so glad that you all have joined us. And as people continue putting stuff in the chat, I just want to really give a warm welcome to everyone for joining today. As I mentioned, my name is Sammie, and I'm going to be your host. I'm really fortunate to have come to this work after a decade organizing with transgender and queer Asian and Pacific Islander folks in movements for immigrant rights, for racial justice, and for community safety. And for about 5.5 years, I was the executive director at Lavender Phoenix. And following that, I've been really fortunate to have spent so much time over these past 2 years zooming out to one of the biggest questions that have come up in our work, which is, what is the role of belonging in social movements? And today, we're going to dig into this question and look at some of the practices that can help our movements thrive. But before we get there, I want to quickly dedicate this event to 2 powerhouses, 2 elders who I think are young for being elders, who are now ancestors. Cecilia Gentili was a powerful trans woman and an advocate for sex workers, for migrants, for disabled people, for queer weirdos. According to her children, She was the mother of all whores. She radiated joy, brought people from all backgrounds together, supported thousands of trans folks to get healthcare, and talked to every single person like she was incredibly joyful to have them there. And Merle Ratner, was a lifelong anti-war organizer and activist fighting against the Vietnam War. Her activism started when she was 13 years old. And from that point on, she was always there to remind us what was possible on the other side of our work, constantly pushing us into stronger definitions of solidarity and supporting the next generation of freedom fighters. Each of these two people I know briefly, but have felt a lasting legacy of what it has meant to be in relationship with them. They have shown me belonging. And I hope that this event and this offering and what we're able to do together is in their memory, is in their wisdom, and is in their legacy. So shout out to these two. And thank you for helping me honor them through this event today. So what are we going to get up to in this next hour and 15 minutes? We're of course here to launch the Right Size Belonging workbook and website. But more than that, I was hoping that this would be a start of many, many conversations, a start to conversations to help us understand the current culture of belonging scarcity, of individualism, of alienation, a discussion to help us dig into a more nuanced belonging that really speaks to power, to trauma, to materialism, and a mobilization opportunity to really get all of us, organizers, community builders, social change makers, to integrate practices that build belonging in our spaces and in our work. Wow, that's ambitious. How are we going to get that done, Sammie? You are so right, me in third person. Let me show you my agenda. It's a simple agenda, and we're already in the middle of it. We're in our introduction. I'm going to give a brief presentation about cultivating belonging. Then the moment we've been waiting for, a panel discussion, which is not something people often say, but this time is genuine. And then lastly, we're going to take action. Bam. It is going to be so juicy. You're right, Jenica. So what's your role in all of this? You may ask. Well, I'm so glad you asked, because you do have a role despite this being a webinar. I have some requests of you. For the next hour and 15, for our short time together, please try to be here. Try to minimize time on your phone or on other tabs as much as possible to stay with the folks who are sharing, who are present, who are with us in that way. And right in the same vein, please take care of your needs, whether that means eating, going to the bathroom, taking a step away for a moment, writing, drawing, whatever you may need to be here. Lastly, you know, I've been in the Zoom land now for 4 hot years. And in terms of Zoom, there's few things more painful than speaking into a void. So please use reactions and type in the chat to let us know what you're feeling. Whether that's stuff you're vibing with, there's a quote that you're like, gotta write that down, share it with us. Or if there's something you're really feeling, something you're like, say that again, type it in the chat, let us know what you appreciate, what you want more of. Does that sound good? Oh, yeah. I see. It was a test for the chat and y'all did it. Thank you so much. So I'm going to try to keep my eyes on the chat as much as possible, but our wonderful volunteer Jenica will also be helping to monitor the chat. Let's give love to Jenica. Oh, whoop, 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 whoop. Thank you, Jenica. We love you. All right. Thank you all so much. So as we get into this presentation, Oh my God, that is so cute. Shout out to your partner for your 11-year anniversary. That's very sweet. So as we get into this presentation, I just want to invite everyone here, all 99 attendees, whoa, gorgeous number, to ground for a moment in whatever way feels right for you. I know that we're coming to this moment from a world of near unimaginable and somehow deeply predictable violence. So I'm not going to ask people to be here in a way that feels disingenuous to them. Some people really want to ground in their bodies, and for others, that might be very difficult in this moment. But for whatever grounding means to you, I invite you to just take a minute and do that. Whether that means taking some deep breaths, inhaling to really fill up your lungs, and exhaling to dispel any things you don't believe to be true. Whether that means inhaling to feel your width, your length, your depth. Exhaling to remember that you fill up the whole room that you occupy. Your limits are beyond your physical body. Inhaling to remember why you came here. And exhaling to let go of the things that tell you you shouldn't be present. You shouldn't be with people that matter to you. Whatever you need to do to ground, I'll give you another few seconds to do so. Thank you, everyone. So to really get us grounded and situated for the panel, I'm going to start with some foundational understandings that can help situate our work towards belonging. First, what is belonging itself? In our context, belonging can be defined as people feeling that they are seen, valued, and recognized as part of a larger system or organization. It's when people feel like they fit in a space, like their belonging or in their involvement matters, right? It's when you're part of something and it would have an impact if you weren't there, like you're supposed to be there. You know why you're there and you feel you want to be. In our context, that's what belonging means. And the way that I understand it, belonging exists at multiple levels. You belong to yourself, to different relationships, to communities, to neighborhoods, to watersheds, to commons, and to ideas. And despite my own internal desires, and maybe yours, there is no ultimate universal belonging. It changes over time and in different contexts. And one thing I've really learned over the past 2 years is that we're responsible for our own sense of belonging in ourselves. There is no one that can bestow that onto us or grant us something that is actually inherent, that we already have, but that we sometimes struggle to find, seek, or feel. And just as that is true, there has been so much violence that has disconnected us from our inherent belonging. From the violence of colonization, genocide, enslavement, displacement, and the subsequent othering, exclusion, disavowal, many of us have learned that we do not belong in our families, on our land, and in our communities, right? And this learned belonging scarcity has created a crisis. Individualism and isolation limits how we connect with one another and see our role as stewards of the land or of shared resources, how we see ourselves as responsible for a future that comes after us. And I think what I've found is we cannot build the foundation of a new, just world without addressing these cracks in our belonging. I want to take a brief moment to actually share a story about the recently departed Cecilia. Um, because when I was planning this event in the midst of sending emails or something, I learned that Cecilia had passed. And when I learned that, I sobbed. I'd first met Cecilia in 2019 at a retreat for trans and non-binary leaders. And Cecilia was our facilitator. Hard job. We gathered on the first day of this retreat in a hotel conference room in Florida, the air con in the space on full blast while the heat permeated through the windows coming in from outside. And by the time we got to community agreements, maybe like 15 minutes into a multi-day retreat, the space, it had energetically lost it. It was how you say bad vibes, just the worst vibes imaginable. Little did I know, but people came into that space with every type of escalation you could have imagined. There were multi-year beefs, conflicts that half of the conflict didn't know they were in, people who were just like so deeply struggling in their own communities, taking 2 seconds to come to this thing, and many people who felt like they were the only one in the spaces they were coming from, now coming here to do this thing. And for myself, I felt like I was in a room of icons. And as the youngest by far, I did not know why I even had a right to be there. So when we were trying to set community agreements, people outright refused to trust each other. Like someone would propose a community agreement and someone else would go, I'm not going to say yes to that. Why would I trust you? And I was like, whoa, this is bananagrams. People were giving real cutting comments, kind of holding their cards close to their chest. And as our facilitator, Cecilia did not shy away from any of this. She also did not let it happen. When she facilitated, she would go around as we were doing community agreements and talk to every single person like they were having their own one-on-one. She gave people permission to feel however they were feeling, but never let the group lose sight of what we were there to do. As a group, she reminded us of the opportunity we had to exchange lessons and build deeper relationships. Through her humor and her groundedness, she de-escalated people enough to help us each find a sense of belonging in that space, even temporarily. She helped us establish how we could work together, what we could realistically do, and what the group could hold for the 3 days that we managed to be in that retreat. And I share this story because I know that in the coming year and in the times ahead, people are going to come to us just as escalated. Maybe we are the people escalating. And it doesn't matter if folks have been decades in the movement or days in the movement. We are grappling with live horrors and contending with our place in a world that can seem irreparable in its violence. Of course, people are going to be escalated, right? Like how many people here feel dysregulated in this moment in time? Maybe like hopeless or alone, right? And if we, as the people who self-selected to be on a call like this, can feel like this, imagine what the masses, imagine what people even wider may be feeling. I tell that story with all the love and admiration for Cecilia because she showed me the potential of what it meant to cultivate belonging. And even if it was just for a moment, we had a reason to be there, a reason to be in our purpose, and a reason to believe in the future. And that brings me to our role, that brings me to what we can do to cultivate that practice of belonging. Social movement organizations truly have a critical role in embodying the possibility of belonging, right? People come to engage in social movements to win concrete changes, to improve their lives, to build the foundation of a more just society. And while people cannot get all of their belonging needs met in one space or one community or one friendship, if each of us commits to practice, we can build the muscle memory of what it feels, looks, and sounds like to belong. It'll create a culture of right-sized belonging that encourages a balance between our deep agency and a resilient commitment to a collective purpose. It's about balancing who we are and what we are meant to do together. And as organizers, we are responsible for co-creating this sense of right-sized belonging. So that leads me to the practices themselves. I am going to spend truly a brief moment going over each practice one by one. I want us to get into the panel, so I'm not going to go into detail. I am going to leave it up to you to dig into the workbook or the website to understand the different risks, opportunities, challenges that come with each of these. But just to go into each of them briefly. The first practice we have is about anchoring your purpose. People need something to belong to. This is about grounding people in an organizational purpose that is clear, motivating, and aligned with the material needs of your membership. We need to help people understand how the labor they're applying every day, often voluntarily, relates to this purpose. Our second practice is to approach problems with collective governance. Rather than placing all decision-making power or solution-creating responsibility on one person or on a body of people that's disconnected from the issue itself, support people to solve organizational challenges together, just as we do in our organizing from the grassroots. Cynthia said it in the chat, mass protagonism. Am I right? You are right. And this isn't about, just to be clear, this is not about every organization being horizontal. It's not like we all have, which is a great thing as well, but I'm not saying every organization needs to do that necessarily. It is about building relationships and skills in service of meeting our own needs. It's about creating the conditions for us to take responsibility of our lives, understand governance, and get familiar with a just relationship to power. The third practice we have is set boundaries and expectations. This is about evaluating and communicating organizational boundaries that define what you work on, how you operate, who you are accountable to, what you will and you will not do. Sometimes belonging can truly feel all-encompassing. And in late-stage capitalism, shout out, people have fewer spaces and less time to meet their nested belonging needs. I know that I have definitely wanted certain spaces to take on work that was personal to me, even when it doesn't fit the purview of the group. I've wanted a group to be like my everything, like you got to champion all my issues because I'm in this group. And that doesn't work, really. But by defining and redefining our boundaries over time, by communicating about them effectively, setting them together, we set expectations that are less about creating a fictitious total alignment and more about doing what we can do really well, so we don't create a sense of false expectation. Yes, and also shout out to these beautiful illustrations done by my friend Shreya. We will shout them out also at the end, and we'll link to their portfolio. Our fourth practice we have here is about understanding trauma and building emotional skill. As I discussed previously, we're in a moment of emotional upheaval. And I am not asking every organization to become a healing group. or to ask every single person to become a healer. It's definitely not what I'm saying, but I am asserting that we must meet this emotional moment by understanding the ways that trauma impacts the folks we're working with and ourselves, and clarify how the organization addresses and holds that trauma. Doing this type of thing can only improve our ability to meet each other in the current conditions and support one another to grow in alignment with who we want to be, not just who we've been forced to be. And that is a cultivation of belonging. Our fifth practice, I'm going to go over briefly because I'm going to use this as an example, but it's about increasing conflict resilience. This is about creating the conditions that enable people to practice disagreement and generative conflict. It's about increasing our fortitude to be in discomfort and build something stronger from the result. It's about how powerful it is to move past perfection and into something real. Our last practice is connecting to a broader movement ecosystem. We've said it a few times, but belonging is a nested system that happens at different levels. I hope that we can build strong organizational connections with other groups, healers, and resources to strengthen our movement ecosystem and widen belonging. We should be actively encouraging one another to seek out resilient belonging in different organizations and relationships and spaces. I know that was a lot. I'm going to take a pause so we can soak in these 6 practices. Ooh, yummy. And yes, Claude, why are these practices so relevant for interpersonal relationships? True though, true though. And in that vein, let's dig a little bit deeper into one of them. Let's dig a little bit deeper into increased conflict resilience and what I mean by practice. Belonging is not about feeling good or feeling comfortable all the time. When people know it is possible to disagree, to mess up, to make mistakes, to get hurt, and still come together, it is a practice of resilient belonging. And I will say it again. Belonging is not always about feeling good or comfortable all of the time. I know that is so hard on our nervous systems, but belonging is not always about feeling good. If our organizations are not equipped to scaffold conflict or disagreement, people can fall back on learned patterns of conflict. Think about what you have learned in the world. What is your conflict tendency? Is it conflict avoidance? Is it blowing up at people? Is it just cutting folks off? Are certain people in your families or communities of origin treated with impunity, and other people are just expected to fall in line whenever a conflict happens? These are the things that we've learned that sometimes we just replicate because we haven't learned anything else. Conflict, when done generatively, it can lead to our sharpest strategy. When people are supported to engage in conflict past their reaction, past the way their nervous system is trying to save them from a threat that may not be here anymore, a generative conflict can lead to transformation. Conflict resilience is not about having conflict all of the time. It doesn't mean just like you're fighting every day, but it does mean building skills to exist in the tension that conflict can create without running away or falling into learned patterns. And in order to do this practice, there are different tools we can try. I'm just going to give a few examples. Whether these are consensus building tools. Sasha from CAV taught me about how at their member meetings, they hold up different colored pieces of paper, right? They facilitate meetings across a few different languages. So to show agreement, if that's a green, you put up a red. or you'll put up a green to show disagreement. It's a red. And then you'll have further conversation based on what the room has said. There's different strategy debates that we can practice with one another. If you're deciding, is this the right person to target for our campaign? Rather than making people on the fly who may not be comfortable or ready to just outwardly say, no, or I don't know, setting up space in your organization to present the sides of your argument, to have members practice what it would be like to advocate for one or another, to engage and build the skills of principled struggle so that that muscle grows stronger and stronger. There's also just general skill building you can do, whether those are the skills of embodiment, the skills of regular feedback for one another, or accountability as a group and what we do when we do mess up, what we do when we do hurt each other, when we don't do the things we say we're going to do. And this is just one of the practices. You can imagine that there are countless implementation opportunities that add texture to your existing work. And that's another thing that I want to make so clear, that the work of belonging doesn't need to be an additive, an extra committee, like a side project that doesn't get looked at for 6 months. The work of belonging can take shape in the existing relationships, structures, and plans of your organization. And as much as I love and encourage organizational transformation, personal reflection, like let's fucking redo this thing, ultimately belonging is not separate to what we do. It should exist within it. If we think of belonging as separate, we have siloed something that is inherent to every single person that is showing up. So, in preparation for the panel, I am going to launch a poll. Famously, another thing people love in Zoom webinars. Am I going to launch this poll? Let's find out. Yep. I would like to hear from you all which practice you are most excited or curious about. So let me take a second to get this poll up here. All right, again, the poll question is, which practice are you most excited or curious about? And I've gone ahead and launched that poll. As I have launched that poll, panelists, this is your cue that we're going to get started real soon. We've got responses coming in quick. Oh my God, everyone is so quick with it. That is gorgeous and beautiful. People are juiced about increasing conflict resilience. I do wonder if it's because I've talked about it more, but I won't read into it too much. Yes, we also have a lot of excitement for approaching problems with collective governance, some good excitement for setting boundaries and expectations. Wow, but half of us are feeling into conflict resilience. Nom, 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 nom. That's so yummy. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Who knows, I might be, making the poll a bit biased. What can I say? All right, with nearly half the votes, increasing conflict resilience is something we are all very curious about. Thank you all so much for participating. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share the results so you all can also see what we got going on. Yeah, a lot of love as well for approaching problems with collective governance and setting boundaries and expectations. And it is with that context that I'm going to bring us into the panel of folks that can get our minds and hearts thinking about some of these questions. They have no idea what I'm going to say about them, but as I introduce them, please give a little wave, If you're on camera, give a little wave with your voice if you'd like. Yeah, curious, a bunch of organizers are concerned with conflict. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this panel. The first person I would like to introduce is my dear friend, Elliott Fukui. I know Elliott through his extensive community safety organizing, learned through years of work with the Audre Lorde Project, with the Fireweed Collective, and other trans of color organizations. I personally have learned so much about what it means to show up in community from Elliott. And I am extremely honored that you're here. Let's give love to Elliott. Ooh, thank you for being here.
Hey, comrade.
Hi, love you. All right, our second panelist is Gopal Dayaneni. Gopal, I know through his soul-growing work with Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. Gopal's analysis of relational organizing and ecological principles has so deeply informed my own political development in every which way. And I am stoked to have him. Let's give it up for Gopal.
Oh, thank you, Sammie.
Super excited to be here. Thank you.
Yay. Our third is NTanya Lee. NTanya, I know through her rigorous work with Left Roots, and I have long admired her legacy of organizing with working class communities of color in San Francisco. I have greatly benefited from the ways that NTanya has prioritized emotional intelligence as a key facet of a revolutionary organization. Thank you, NTanya, for being here. Yay! Very sweet. And then our fourth panelist is the wonderful Michael Strom. I know Michael through their transformative facilitation work. If you know Michael, you know that Michael's ability to create a container for vulnerability has transformed a space, transforms what I thought was possible in my organizing. And I am so grateful to have them. Let's give it up for Michael.
Hi, everybody.
Wow. Yeah. An amazing panel. Again, selfishly stoked. If you could see the reactions popping off right now, this is like a Twitch stream level of reactions. So I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but let's get into these questions. First, I want to just set the scene from your perspective. And we have Jenica, who's also going to paste the questions in the chat so people know. Yes, I want to set the scene from your perspective. What is the state of belonging in our communities? How are people relating to it? Where are they getting it? What is the texture of that belonging? Now for this question, let's start with NTanya.
Thanks, Sammie. Thanks for bringing us all together. So I want to share a couple pieces of my assessment about the state of belonging and how it looks from my perspective. And it's a particularly national view as someone who's been doing national work for quite a long time. And I also just want to name that I'm 55. I'm in a season of moving through some really deep heartbreak and life transition. And I am really reckoning with the state, the failures of our the political practice of the left, and trying to make real meaning of the errors that I've seen in the last few decades, so that we can actually chart a path to liberation that is real. So I want to start with just saying, I think belonging needs are particularly acute in this historical moment because capitalist alienation is rising. And that I've actually been calling it hyper alienation. And that I think this is a historically unique period. I think the belonging needs are acute in ways that we haven't actually seen previously in our movements. And it's because of decades of neoliberal destruction, really at every level of society, the rise of the right, a global pandemic. And I want to name the decimation of what I call the social infrastructure of working class resilience through neoliberalism has created a moment in racial capitalism where hyperalienation is just a main feature of daily life and social relations that then impacts all of our whole mind body systems, every organization, every collective space, every movement, and the entire culture of our movement. And we've been in these period really systematically underdeveloped and disconnected from our many lineages on the planet, more so now, I believe, than, and especially working class oppressed colonized people are actually more disconnected from the lineages that that made us resilient than we have been. And I would say some of the most resilient people in our movement today are people who actually are have the least distance from their homelands and the least distance from the places where there's a long trajectory of of resilience, including some indigenous communities, but also to name that our belonging needs are acute, and that we don't yet have a left that has intentionally built the kind of social infrastructure and culture to combat this intense level of alienation amongst our people. And we haven't had the tools, and too many people in our movements have been struggling to deal with belonging needs in alienated conditions. And so it's work that many of us are doing, and I'm so grateful for the Belonging Project. I think trying to meet belonging needs is taking up way too much energy of our organizations. And I think that the ways that people are trying to meet it don't have the nuance that Sammie is offering. That there's ways of actually trying to meet the belonging needs of our people and our organizations that actually can strengthen the political project, that can strengthen our unity, strengthen our political work, but mostly I see that not happening. And it's in part because of our own underdevelopment. It isn't just the lack of tools. It's just when you are raised and shaped in a deeply alienated, individualistic society, as we have been under neoliberalism for the last few decades, it really impacts even the most radical amongst us. If our ideas may be radical, but our whole bodies and systems are shaped in really deeply alienated and individualistic ways. And that gets in the way of how we then respond to the alienation amongst our people. And I think there's a particular challenge amongst young people raised in this period who are being radicalized by the incredibly fucked up conditions of the times, but don't have as much of don't have the kind of infrastructure that actually the left has built in the past, and that actually oppressed people and working class people had in the Black freedom struggle. The sort of working class Black institutions and organizations that provided much of the social infrastructure of the Black Power movement and Black freedom struggle have been really decimated over the decades. And we have some rebuilding to do of our own self-governed mass institutions. And we can't move forward in our organizational work and building our movements unless our people actually we're dealing with the alienation amongst our people. And so for me, that belonging is directly tied to that. And then for later conversation, I just want to say, I think we are going to be more able to meet these acute belonging needs that are showing up in all these dysfunctional, conflictual, unnecessarily conflictual ways in our organizations and our movement, if we actually have a different understanding of what human development is, and a different understanding of transformation. And I'd love to talk about that more, but I think it's a way for us to be both more firm with one another, but also more compassionate with one another if we have a different way of understanding what it means to be human on the road to liberation. I'll just end there.
Yummy. That was great, NTanya. Thank you so much. Elliott, could I ask you to go next? Do you feel prepared?
Oui, mon ami. Thank you. I'm super low spoons, and I look like Casper, the friendly ghost, after 72 hours. So I'm gonna stay off camera, but really grateful to see everyone's faces and names. God, what is the state of belonging? I really want to just echo and clap for what NTanya brought, because I think that's a lot of what I'm also seeing. I've also been thinking about the flip side of this in terms of how the right is using the lack of belonging as a tool to pull in people into groupthink. And with the, the way social media is functioning now, right, that they use they use our vulnerability, right, as a means of manipulating, right, people to join their side. And so there's that edge with belonging. And I think this is also something that I'm seeing of like, we also have a tendency to groupthink. We also have a tendency to want to follow someone. We also have the tendency to, right, and how we've seen how that's played out on the left as well, maybe over the past 300 years or so, bullshit menchies now, right? Like we can see how that also shifts our ability to be effective in our campaign work and actually do the type of radical change work that we need to do. And I think there's also something, I was thinking about this, I'm going to be a nerd right now. I was thinking about this Baudrillard quote from The Power of Agony, or the agony of power, I'm sorry. And he says, power itself must be abolished, and not solely because of a refusal to be dominated, which is at the heart of all traditional struggles, but also just as violently in the refusal to dominate. And I think that in a lot of the framing on the left, because it has been, a lot of our work is necessarily reactionary, right? This thing happened in the community. We have to go and do this protest, this vigil, or they're trying to pass this law, right? So we are moving from these reactionary places and maybe not also thinking about what does it mean to actually let go of power? What does it mean instead of encouraging queer and trans people to find ways to belong within capitalist systems, to be like, how do we find ways to belong to each other, right? And to move away from influencer culture, move away from groupthink, but really into, right, what is it, how are the ways that we are all asking the question of what it means to give up power, knowing that that encourages and actually is necessary if, like Cecilia, rest in power, who I'm gonna cry, but she did that. She didn't come at us like you're the client and I'm here to give you something. You would go to the appointment, she would take you to lunch afterwards. And she'd say, I know you have a hard time, boo, at the hospital. How are you feeling being here? What do you need today? Have you eaten today? It wasn't professionalized. It was like someone seeing you and breaking down that power dynamic, right, of provider and client, right, while still respecting what her role was. And her role was to get me to keep coming back to my appointments. Her role was to get me to, right. So she did that beautifully, I think, for a lot of us in New York City, and that had not existed for many of us before that. So when I think about the state of belonging, I think I really am trying to figure out how to dance on that edge of how are we making sure we're not promoting groupthink and influencer culture and us trying to become the people in power or having power over, but instead, how are we creating the types of belongings that, like you're saying, make people feel seen and whole and heard, and in a way where they also feel powerful enough to say no, even to a comrade when their comrade is asking them to do something that doesn't align with their principles and values, right? Those are the types of leaders and members that we need to be developing in this current moment. So I'm done. Thank you all. You're so brilliant. I'm so excited already.
Thank you, Elliott. That was gorgeous. I think we have time for one more go at this question if either Gopal or Michael want to chime in. If not, that's also okay.
I'm happy to defer to you, Michael. Okay.
You go.
Okay, I'll say, I think there's a lot we could go down. It's like what we mean by belonging in the first place. And I think the definition you gave is really helpful. And I think we often, I guess one thing I'll just say about, additional thing I'll add about the state of belonging in our communities is I think we are consistently underestimating the profound alienation of having all aspects of our lives mediated through technologies that we don't design, we don't control, and can never service by the very nature of what they are. We think of technologies as tools, and we think we can use the tools however we want, but that's not what a technology is. A technology is the embodiment of relationships of resources and power over time. And they are built on and have built in um, uh, relationships of power that are not of our design or choosing. And so for me, I think there is something really important about what NTanya is saying about sort of where we are with neoliberalism, but also with techno fetishism, techno dependence, or even for people like me, tech resignation. We're just resigned to it. So that's what just one thing I would add. And then, yeah, there's a lot of ways we could go, but I also want to just name that, like, one way to think, like, there's a kind of sense of belonging that's sort of an enclosure, and then there's a sense of belonging that's really about the commons. And both require us to have a sense of what community we're talking about, but there are ways in which we mistake access to enclosure as belonging. And I think this is related to what Elliott was saying. It's like just getting access to things that we've been excluded from through enclosure does not mean we then belong. It simply means we are part of the enclosure. We're just a resource to be extracted from, like everything else in the enclosure. But a sense of belonging that's actually, like, for me, what I've been learning and growing into is like the way in which queerness is a politic of radical complexity and radical inclusion, that like these kinds of politics are politics of creating belonging through a kind of commoning, through a kind of through a way in which we actually do practice shared governance and meeting our needs collectively together as an expression of belonging. So I'll shut up, but I think we should be able to notice when belonging is becoming or leaning into an enclosure of identity, and that our access to belonging is curated and mediated by whoever has the keys to the enclosure. Yeah, sorry.
Oh my God, don't say sorry. No, that was great, everyone. Juicy, am I right? I actually want to ask a question that's a bit of a follow-up to that. And I want to make sure, Michael, I'm going to ask you to go up next after I ask Gopal to elaborate a bit more. But when I spoke to a bunch of people for this project, I honestly reached out to a few people who I thought wouldn't think belonging was that important. I just wanted like a wide range of opinions. But to my surprise, across sectors and disciplines, identities, backgrounds, each person, every single person, really valued belonging as crucial to our work. So kind of on the other end of what you're saying, Gopal, on the other end of a kind of false belonging, or belonging that is about access to the enclosure, on the other side of that, what does belonging actually make possible when it's done in a liberatory way, when belonging is queered, when belonging is radical? What does it make possible in our organizations and social movements?
I'll start by just saying, everything. So for me, what's useful about belonging, or for me as a frame, is the same thing as what's useful about love for me as a frame. And it's both of them are fundamentally centering relationship as the basis of inquiry, right? And that's really the most important thing. That is resistance to alienation, is to center relationships in everything. Even, I always say this all the time, like the idea that people have ideas is bullshit. ideas are an expression of symbiosis. They only exist in the company of others, right? You only have ideas because you are not alone, in the same way that you only have a name because you're not alone. And so the notion that it's my name is absurd, right? The name exists so that I can belong with others. And so for me, this thing of like relationship is it's the point of organizing, and relationship should be the thing we center and how we move. And in the same way that I think and I don't think we need to abolish power. Actually, power is a dimension of every relationship. The question is, what is the relationship of power you want? And if we do not structure and culture and create the relationships of power we want, we will always default to the relationships of power in the dominant society. And so let's cultivate the relationships of power we want: care, cooperation, consent, right? Equality, radical inclusion. Like these are that is about, those are expressions of power, right? And so I would, I think in that way, belonging is really important. And there's other frames that we can use to hold it. What worries me, I'll say, and then I'll pass it on, is like, what worries me is that belonging might be belonging that we don't want belonging to become the sort of like this story of like that belonging will save us from the responsibility to do all the organizing that needs to happen and the struggle and the transfer. Like I'll just say one thing that has that I've noticed is like there was an explosion of interest in narrative and narrative strategy. And we had this idea, and it got to a point where people were starting to, organizers starting to think that it's all just about changing the story. And it's like, as if stories are told, but stories are actually lived. Like narrative means to know. Narratives are lived. And if we don't change the lived experience, we can tell all the stories we want. We can get all the memes we want. We can do all the internets we want, all that stuff. It has to actually involve fundamentally changing how we live in the world. And that those changes are the expression of different relationships of power. And so what do we, like, belonging is a practice. Belonging isn't a, it's not a, you wrote this, belonging isn't a thing or a destination, it's a practice. And in that practice, I think, is where our liberation can live. But it can't live in just like pining for belonging, or like somebody creates belonging. That's not, it is the daily practice of being in right relationship with each other, and that's struggle.
That is so true. Michael, do you want to add on to that? Do you want to complicate it, move it forward?
I'll give it a try. I'm excited there's a recording. I'm gonna need to watch some of this again already. This is so juicy. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. I'm just really vibing with what people are saying. I think when we rightly understand belonging in the way that NTanya is putting in the chat, of like, it is a fundamental human need, it becomes not that belonging will save us, but that it's our work to save belonging. That like it is our work, when we understand the horizon we're reaching toward, to build a world where we belong to each other, where we belong to the land again, where the fruits of our labor belong to all of us, where the resources belong to all of us, right? Like that is ultimately what we are fighting for. And we can feel that in like our deepest places. Our deepest places know that we are striving for this belonging, right? And so part of I think our task is to like marshal that in the right direction, right? To like say, instead of looking right at the immediate who's right in front of you, to lift up and look to the horizon of like, where are we headed? And what is our role in that? Right? How does our drive toward belonging become a drive into our own agency? Right? As opposed to that hurt or pain or that drive indicating where we need others to fix it. right? Or where we need to be met by someone else, lifted up by someone else. And so I think that is a primary thing that a right understanding of belonging offers our movements. I think a right understanding of belonging also just allows us to show up whole. If we recognize that any time we are convening a group in any way, everyone is arriving asking, do I matter here? And how do I matter here? And understanding that that is at play, regardless of our assessment of the way it's at play, that is at play, if that becomes fundamental to how we gather each other, then I think the way we move together shifts.
All right, we got time for one more person on this question, and Tanya or Elliott, if you want to go for it. If not, we could go into our next juicy question.
You all are so brilliant. Just thanks for having me with you all. I'm just learning so much.
Oh, everyone here is brilliant. The chat is truly alight with appreciations and shout outs. I've noticed this in the chat a bit, so I want to take us in this direction, but understanding the depth of what belonging means, understanding the way that we do need to lift up, then we need to look into the horizon. We need to understand this as a key facet of how we do the organizing that we do. How would you start to strengthen right-sized belonging in your work? Are there specific skills you would build or questions you would ask your group, questions you'd talk about for groups of folks? And I want to start with Michael on this one. I know you just went, but I've learned so much of this from you, so I am going to ask you to start.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Just to as like a framing before this, I think I just want to underline everything that's been said about like how structural our broken belonging is, how like centuries old, how like we are like on chains of belonging injuries built on top of each other, and that's how we're arriving here. And so in light of that, I think there's like a real, my like belly says like, be soft about it, be gentle about it, be compassionate about it. Like there isn't a right way. We don't know yet. This is like an act of faith in many ways. We are trying to figure out how to do a thing we have not yet done. And so like we're all in an experiment. I'm in an experiment, right? I like facilitate shit like this, and I'm also dealing with like very recent belonging failures in the way that I have led people, you know? And so it's like I just want to invite that energy, that approach of like loving experimentation as we move into these questions. And then honestly, Sammie, you just wrote a whole workbook. I was like thinking about my response to this question of like, where do we start? And I was like, I might know 6 practices. And so I actually just wanted to say a couple things I love about this workbook as a starting point. That's part of how I want to answer this question. And highlight the things in there that feel like really juicy starting points to me. One is just the basic building block of talking about it, right? In generative semantics, we say choice follows awareness. So there's something powerful in even just beginning to be like, this is a thing we're looking at together. We're asking questions of, is this right-sized or is this wrong-sized? We're looking through these list of practices and beginning to ask, where are we skilled? Where are we excited? Where do we think we got it? And then where are we nervous? Where are we turning away from? Where might we need to build, right? And so just beginning to even understand how deeply belonging is woven into our work opens us to, now I'm aware of it, I can make a different choice. And so I think that in and of itself shouldn't be underestimated as a starting point. I also think I really vibed with the one about collective governance in particular, because it's where I've been failing or some of my most recent failures have been. I talk a lot about culture, and I do a lot of work around culture, around our collective practice. And there's also, without, like, culture and structure are two sides of the same coin. They're the inhale, exhale, right? And so like, it actually doesn't matter if you are good at giving hard feedback if there's not a structure for that feedback, if there's not a place that it goes, right? It actually doesn't matter if you can debate, right? Debate about, should we pause? Should we rest? If you're not paying people in a way that meets your values, right? There's just like lots of different ways where actually I think we should really make sure that like any cultural practice, any relational practice we're building is really deeply met by a structural commitment to like, how are people actually set up to engage in this? And yeah, then the last thing I'll say, just one more quick little bit, is that I think somewhere in the workbook, you talk about the purpose belonging framework. And I find that super, super useful. That as I said before, everyone arrives at a group asking, do I matter here? But they also arrive, if it's a justice-oriented group, asking, does what I do matter here? Right? And so people both want to have an impact and feel a part of something. And so I think understanding those as like fundamentally woven together, that the more clear and on purpose we feel, the more we're able to access our belonging to the work we do in service of that purpose. And the more we belong, the more we can take meaningful action in service of that purpose, right? Just like starting inside of that framework and inviting ourselves to like, to assess where our organizations are at, to really ask people, right? The questions of like, do you feel like you matter here? Do you feel like the work you do matters here? And like, if that is hard, then maybe we shouldn't move on to the other steps yet. Like maybe that's where we should be starting. And maybe we should be having those conversations and doing that assessment with our hearts and our bodies as much as we're doing it with our minds. So that's what I think of Sammie's workbook. Everyone go use it.
Thanks, Michael. Wow, it's like I asked you to say that. And Tanya, can I ask you to go next and kind of continue into this question of where should folks start, or what are the skills that we could begin to develop?
Yeah, I mean, I just resonate with everything Michael was just sharing. And I wanted to offer a couple of things that are primarily from my experience in Left Roots in the last 5 years. And hopefully folks have seen the organizational culture document that we created that summed up some of the lessons from our efforts to create internal cohesion, sense of belonging, anchored in shared clarity about the political purpose of the organization, so that our belonging helped us meet our purpose rather than was anyway. So one of them is people want to be seen, all the things that we're saying. And one of the practices inside the sort of, we called them cadre circles inside Left Roots, was a practice where individuals had to share vulnerably their assessment of their actual conditions, their external conditions, what pressures were on them, but also their internal conditions, their own health, their stress level, their mental health, share them vulnerably with comrades, and make commitments about how they were going to address those conditions. But part of what then happened when we as an organization had more of a culture of people vulnerably sharing their actual individual conditions, well, obviously it makes possible for there to be more support, right? And when you feel supported about your conditions, we're humans, we want to help each other. But also then we could make assessments about the membership conditions that named the whole range of conditions, and people could feel seen not as an individual, but as part. So you could see like many people in this period are feeling deep pain about X issue and are really needing to take action toward that issue, whereas other people are feeling more anxiety about this other thing, like, you know, or some people are feeling unheard. Some people are the leadership layer of the organization is actually feeling overworked. Being able to name multiple, the range of conditions inside the organization, and name where there were contradictions actually helped people feel seen, even if it wasn't literally naming them. And I think there's often our organizations, in an attempt to have unity, we overgeneralize about what's actually happening inside our organization, and we don't name the real differences in the conditions. And we don't name the contradictions in the organization. I mean contradiction in just the way of like, there's two things that are part of the whole of the organization that are both true, that are in tension with each other. And I think when we do that, it depersonalizes conflict, it depersonalizes tensions and differences in the organization. So that's one thing, is just that practice of just sharing more vulnerably conditions. And then the other thing was, you know, Steve was saying in the chat about feminists, and yeah, as a Marxist and as a feminist, I think just the basic, some feminist practices around having it be valued in some concrete way in the organization, people who are both doing the work of how are you doing, asking the questions that Michael was saying, how do you feel here, who do that work, and ensuring that those people are being pushed to also develop other skills that are not only about the care work, because that work is so gendered in our patriarchal society. And so when you have people who are both, you know, doing some of the sort of lead intellectual labor or lead strategists or things that are traditionally masculine gendered, getting those people to take up the care work and to take up the responsibility for asking those questions of how are we feeling in our mind and our bodies. But then you also challenge the people who are drawn to that work to take up new capacities. I think that when that is intentionally done in the organization, it has a really powerful impact on the overall culture.
Delicious. Elliott, I want to ask you to go next. And as you answer this in terms of where we can go with organizations, I also want to ask you, because I think I've learned this so much from you in our interpersonal relationship and in how I see this in the world, how we also cultivate belonging, not just in our organizations, in our spaces, but also in ourselves and beyond any one organization. How does that look? What are those practices, those nested practices that we can start to cultivate or strengthen?
Oh yeah. Also, again, just really appreciating what everyone's bringing to the table. So for me, I think so when I started organizing, I actually started at like places like Clean Water Action and Jewish Community Action, and like I am not Jewish, you know, like places that were around. Planned Parenthood was down the street from me. And so for me, organizing first started very spatially. You know, like it was what was happening in my neighborhood, the issues that I saw in my community as a young person, and also a desire I was to learn, you know, like what are these issues? How can I show up in this community in this way? What does it mean for as a queer and trans person to be supporting feminist organizations, right? What does it mean for me to be in environmental justice spaces? And in order to do that, and this was back in ye olden days, in the early 2000s, right? Nobody knew what a trans was. I would show up and they would be like, who the hell is this tiny person who just popped up here, right? And a part of belonging for me was also understanding that like people are not going to know who I am. And even if you understand trans issues or you understand what it means to be Hafu or Buddhist, that doesn't mean you understand me. And I can't assume that of the other people that I'm interacting with, right? Just because someone is embodied in a particular way or identifies in a particular way, I can't come into that space with an assumption, right? It really is about how do we maintain our curiosity about ourselves and each other together. I would also say, if you can, getting de-escalation training. So I also started a lot in community security and cop watch spaces. And that was actually, I mean, it shows up in my day-to-day meetings and organizing work. Like, obviously it's very different to like de-escalate a Nazi or whatever than your coworker, but like, hopefully, but like, otherwise your org needs some work. But like, you can apply de-escalation strategies. That's kind of, everyone was talking about self-awareness leading to choice, right? And my friend Che describes safety as agency. And when I think about the ways that we also need to be responsible for our own safety, and that we need to be thinking about how am I keeping everyone safe, is also a part how we create belonging. Disability justice is also another great framework that really supported me and in thinking about, well, firstly, feeling okay bringing my full self into a space as a disabled person means other disabled people could do that, right? Being able to be honest and cry and not try to be the tough guy means other trans men can call me and cry, and maybe they're not going to, do something unaccountable or harmful, right? So it's also, I think, about how are we modeling to each other this safety and care, even when it's very scary and vulnerable. And that when you have tools like de-escalation strategies that are verbal, I really love doing giving and receiving feedback, right? I love doing scenarios and skits with people, right? Because it's also about getting some of that embodied practice. And like, I think Michael was talking about that too, right? So I think when you're thinking about what skills you want to develop to feel belonging in yourself, you have to, right, like Gopal said, nobody can make you belong. You have to belong to yourself. And for me, that was also really getting very clear about my principles and values and where my hard lines and no's and boundaries are. I won't do something if I can't bring my people with me. I won't do something if it, right, like compromises my membership or who I'm working with, their trust in me, right? Because without that, we don't have a movement, we don't have an organization, we don't have a community, right? We have reactivity. So I'll stop there, but I think, think about what are the ways I de-escalate myself? What are the ways I know how to de-escalate other people? Because you do, if you've ever lived in a family or been outside in your life, you have de-escalated at some point, right? And it's just like getting really confident and comfortable that you can apply that in any situation, and that encourages belonging, but it also encourages us all to be like, what is safety? And that we are all responsible when we are in space together for each other's safety.
Thank you so much. We are so close to the end of this event, but quickly, I'm going to ask Gopal if you'd like to add any.
I would actually. Surprise. No, just kidding. Well, I wanted to bring the sense of the self-sense of belonging from a different perspective as a middle-aged cis hetero married man from a patriarchal culture and a patriarchal upbringing. I actually have to learn that I am not entitled to belong everywhere all the time. Like, I have been raised and cultured and empowered to belong wherever I want. And obviously there are spaces I'm excluded from, but against my will. But most places, especially in the left, I get to decide if I want to belong. And learning that I don't belong everywhere is an important. Belonging has boundaries. It shouldn't have borders, but it does have to have boundaries in the same way that all commons have boundaries. Like, it's not like the lie about commons is that it's a free-for-all, that everybody gets to take and do whatever they want. That's not what it is, right? It is a practice of self-governance. And belonging has to involve that. And so for me, I think just on the personal part of it, it's like understanding the limits of my own empowered sense of belonging and how dangerous that can be for others, or how, if not dangerous, like how it can become a barrier for other people's participation and their own sense of belonging. So that, I think that's part of my own journey, just on that question.
Wow. That was such a helpful framing, such a helpful way to end that offering. I would like this to continue for the rest of my life, but that's not how time works, unfortunately. But I want to give just the utmost love. There has been so much love in the chat, but let's do like a little love surge, if you will, in the chat to all of the panelists for their incredible wisdom, their brilliance, all of the smart, sharp, loving things that they have said. Thank you so, so very, very much. I am incredibly honored that you four have joined for this conversation. I know not everyone is into panels or into online or into talking out loud in front of a lot of people. So from the deep, deep depths of my heart, I am just so grateful. This is all recorded and we will be listening to it for days to come. I am so, so sure. We are almost to an incredible moment where I'm going to show you the workbook live. What? So in order to do that, I'm going to take a second to give some appreciations because, of course, I simply must. All right. So here on the screen, I would just like to thank all of the people who I had conversations with to make this happen. This is also in the workbook, so please check it out. I've just been so lucky to talk to the most amazing people as part of this project. I also want to thank all of the people who have looked over drafts, who have helped with this event. Shout out to Connie for helping with tech. Shout out to Jenica for volunteering at this event. Again, the incredible art throughout the website and the workbook is done by Shreya. Shout out to Miyoe for helping put the website together so beautifully. Shout out to the lovely Hannah for helping do the audio recording and editing all of it. Hannah is in the room right now.
I cried through the whole thing.
She cried through the whole thing. And again, shout out to our panelists. And now, the moment you have probably been waiting for. Right-sized belonging is live. And let's take a look at it. If you go to belongingpractices.org, you can see the website, which is chock full with the content, background information, all of this stuff about why we should think about belonging. You can see each of the practices in length. Wow. Again, shout out to Miyoe for taking what I had in my brain as a website and putting it into action. The website's probably a bit slow because now we're all looking at it. But on the website, you can also download the full workbook, which looks like this. Wow, check that out. Check that out. If you prefer a PDF, you can get your PDF on. It's clickable, featuring this beautiful art by Shreya once again. And if reading isn't your jam, don't you worry, because you can listen to an audio recording in the tools section of the website, an audio recording of me reading it in my best podcast voice with some special guests? You're gonna have to listen to find out. Exactly. So I'm very, very grateful to say, and Jenica already put it in the chat, but Jenica, if you could paste it one more time, belongingpractices.org. I would just like to say that now this work lives with all of us. Like I said at the start, it is all of our role to cultivate belonging in ourselves and in our organizations. And in this moment, with this ongoing genocide and with the hectic year to come, we are going to need to get good at doing this for our movements to thrive. If you want to talk to me further about it, you can contact me using the contact form on the website. It sends an email right to me. But in this moment, I also want to amplify a call to action put out recently by Palestinian-led organizations in the US. I know that this is President's Day. The fuck? So please continue to turn out and put pressure on the White House and Congress to stop arming and fueling the genocide in Gaza. Big boo for President's Day. Can I get a boo in the chat? Boo. So true. So Jenica is going to paste a link to a toolkit so you can continue to take action. I want to make this so clear. Our belonging in this world is near meaningless if we turn away from violence in order to receive it. I belong to the idea of liberation against all colonizers. And I implore you with every cell in my body to continue to do anything you can to embody that belonging in action. Thank you all so much again for being here. Thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you to all of the participants in the chat, all of the people who have shouted this out, the people who have made this project possible. You are who I belong to. Thank you so, so much. Really grateful to be here. Mwah, 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 mwah.